November 1950. The airspace above the Yalu River is a frozen, high-altitude arena where the laws of physics seem to be rewriting themselves. From the perspective of the Soviet Union, the sky belongs to the future, and the future is the jet engine. Imagine you are a Soviet advisor, standing in a command bunker on the Chinese side of the border. The air is thick with the smell of cheap tobacco and the ozone tang of high-powered radio equipment. You are looking at a map of the Korean peninsula. To you, and to the pilots you are secretly directing, the American Air Forces are a paradox. They are massive, yes. They are well-funded, certainly, but they are relying on ghosts. On your radar screens and in your intelligence briefings, you see the silhouettes of the past. The Americans are fielding P-51 Mustang aircraft. These are propeller-driven relics. They are machines built for a war that ended 5 years ago. They have straight wings. They have piston engines that cough smoke. They vibrate. They are slow. In contrast, your pilots, the elite volunteer aviators from the Soviet Air Force, are strapped into the cockpits of the MiG-15 aircraft. This machine is not just an airplane, it is a revelation. It has swept wings that slice through the air. It has a Klimov VK-1 engine that screams with the power of thousands of pounds of thrust. It can climb at a rate that makes the American propeller planes look like they are hovering motionless in the sky. It is armed with massive 37mm cannons designed to tear heavy bombers in half with a single hit. The math is simple. It is absolute. A jet fighter traveling at nearly 700 miles per hour cannot lose to a propeller plane struggling to hit 400. It is a biological impossibility, like a shark losing a fight to a goldfish. And yet, the reports coming across your desk in the freezing cold of late 1950 are not making sense. The radio chatters with the voices of Russian pilots, speaking in code, their breath heavy against their oxygen masks. They are hunting. They spot a formation of American P-51 Mustangs below them. The altitude difference is massive. The speed difference is overwhelming. The Soviet pilot pushes the stick forward. The MiG-15 aircraft drops like a stone, accelerating past the speed of sound in a dive. The plan is standard. A boom and zoom. Attack. Drop in, fire the heavy cannons, and rocket back up to altitude before the Americans even know they are under attack. But then, the geometry breaks. As the MiG-15 aircraft screams down, the American plane does something the jet cannot do. It turns. It does not just turn, it snaps. The P-51 Mustang banks hard, pivoting on a dime, using the immense torque of its propeller and its straight wings to change direction instantly. The Soviet pilot, moving at 600 miles per hour, cannot follow. His controls stiffen. The G-forces slam him into his seat. If he tries to turn that tight, his wings will rip off, or he will black out. He overshoots. He flashes past the target in the blink of an eye. And in that split second, the impossible happens. The obsolete American plane is no longer a target. It is a predator. The Soviet pilot checks his rear view. He expects to see empty sky. Instead, he sees the nose of a World War II fighter. He sees the sparkle of muzzle flashes. 6 50-caliber machine guns are hammering at his fuselage. The impossible event occurs. A trail of black smoke erupts from the tail of the state-of-the-art jet. The MiG-15 aircraft, the pinnacle of communist engineering, shudders. The turbine whines and dies. The pilot is forced to eject, blasting out of his $10,000 technological marvel, floating down into the snowy mountains, defeated by a piece of history. Back in the bunker there is silence. You look at the other officers, no one speaks. The telemetry confirms it. A piston-engine fighter has just shot down a swept-wing jet. It defies the doctrine. It defies the technology. It defies the logic of the Cold War. This was not supposed to happen. The Americans were supposed to be terrified. They were supposed to see the swept wings of the MiG and run. Instead, they are staying, and they are killing. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden tactical realities of history, make sure you are subscribed to Cold War Impact. We investigate the forgotten battles that shaped the modern world. The confusion in the Soviet command is palpable. This isn't just a lost aircraft, it is a crisis of confidence. The initial theory is that it was a fluke, a lucky shot, a one-in-a-million accident where the jet pilot made a catastrophic error. But then it happens again, and again. Reports start filtering in of MiG-15 aircraft returning to base with bullet holes in their tails, holes that could only have come from a plane getting behind them. How does a plane that is 300 miles per hour slower get behind a jet? The Soviet engineers rush to the hangars. They inspect the damage. They run the calculations. They look at the turn radius of the MiG-15 aircraft versus the P-51 Mustang aircraft. They realize the trap. The Americans are not flying these old planes because they have to. They are flying them differently. They are luring the jets into a game of angles, not speed. But there is something else. Something in the way the American pilots are flying suggests they are not just reacting. They are waiting. They seem to know exactly when the jet is going to dive. They seem to know the exact limitations of the Soviet optics. It is almost as if they are baiting the trap. The mystery deepens when you analyze the wreckage of the jets that didn't make it back. The entry wounds of the bullets are precise. They are clustered around the engine intake and the cockpit. These are not spray and pray shots from a terrified pilot firing blindly. These are sniper shots. Who is in those cockpits? The Soviet intelligence assumes the Americans are putting their best aces in the jets, the F-80 Shooting Stars or the F-86 Sabres that are just starting to arrive. They assume the P-51 Mustangs are being flown by rookies, the expendable pilots sent to do ground attacks. But the aggression of these propeller pilots suggests otherwise. They are flying with a level of coordination and ferocity that scares the jet pilots. You read a pilot debriefing from a lieutenant who survived an encounter. He describes diving on a lone Mustang. "I had him," he says. "He was slow. He was flying straight. I lined up the sights, and then..." The lieutenant pauses. Then he vanished. The Mustang hadn't vanished. It had performed a split-S maneuver, rolling inverted and diving toward the valley floor, skimming the treetops. The MiG-15 pilot tried to follow, but the jet engine takes time to spool up. It lags. By the time the jet had power, the Mustang was gone, hidden in the ground clutter of the radar, invisible against the terrain. The technological superiority of the Soviet Union is hitting a wall of American tactical stubbornness. The jet is a sword, sharp, fast, deadly. But the propeller plane is becoming a shield, a blunt object that the sword keeps shattering against. The question burning through the command chain is no longer, when will we wipe them out? It is, what are we missing? There is a variable in the equation that the Soviet engineers did not account for. It isn't horsepower. It isn't aerodynamics. It is something harder to quantify. It is the reason why a pilot in a 1945 machine is willing to fly head-on into a formation of 1950 jets. As the winter of 1950 deepens, the mystery moves from the air to the ground. The wreckage of a downed P-51 Mustang aircraft is recovered near the front lines. Soviet technical officers swarm over it. They are looking for secret modifications. They are looking for new radar. They are looking for nitrous oxide injection systems. They strip the plane down to its bolts. They find nothing. It is a standard, stock North American P-51D Mustang. It has the same Packard Merlin engine it had in World War II. It has the same guns. It has the same aluminum skin. There is no secret weapon inside the metal. So, the weapon must be the man. By early 1951, the mood in the Soviet debriefing rooms has shifted from arrogance to a confused frustration. The interrogators are grilling their own pilots. The question is always the same. Why did you not fire? The pilots, exhausted and soaked in sweat after pulling 6 Gs, slam their helmets on the table. Their answer highlights a paradox of warfare that no one in the engineering bureaus predicted. "I was too fast," they say. "I was too fast to kill." This is the second layer of the mystery. The Americans have turned the Soviet Union's greatest advantage, raw speed, into a liability. Consider the physics of the engagement. A MiG-15 aircraft is designed to intercept nuclear bombers. It is built to climb high, fly straight, and destroy large, slow-moving targets like the B-29 Superfortress aircraft. Against a B-29 bomber, the MiG is the perfect weapon. But against a P-51 Mustang aircraft, the MiG is a clumsy giant. The intelligence officers start piecing together the tactical nightmare. When a MiG-15 pilot spots a P-51 Mustang, he is usually diving from 30,000 feet. He is traveling at Mach 0.9. The closure rate is terrifying. The target, the small, camouflage-painted American fighter, is growing in the windscreen at a rate of nearly 1,000 feet per second. The Soviet pilot has perhaps 2 seconds to aim, fire, and pull up. But here is the technical flaw that the Americans seem to have discovered. At high speeds, the MiG-15 aircraft suffers from an aerodynamic instability known as snaking or Dutch roll. The nose of the jet wanders slightly from left to right. It creates a wobble. When you are firing 37mm cannons, which have a slow rate of fire and heavy recoil, you need a stable platform. You need the plane to be as steady as a rock. But the faster the MiG goes, the more it wobbles. The pilot is fighting the stick, trying to line up the crosshairs on a Mustang that is weaving through the valleys. The bullets fly wide. The shells explode harmlessly against the granite cliffs. And then comes the overshoot. This is the moment the American pilots are waiting for. The moment the jet screams past them, unable to slow down. The MiG-15 aircraft has primitive air brakes. It cannot dump speed quickly. The P-51 Mustang, however, is a master of drag. The American pilot cuts the throttle, drops the flaps, and practically stops in mid-air. To the Soviet pilot, it looks like the American plane has hit a brick wall. The jet flies right past the Mustang. Suddenly, the hunter is in front of the prey. The Soviet pilot is now presenting his hot tailpipe to the 6 machine guns of the Mustang. The Soviet tactical analysis reveals something even more disturbing. The Americans are dragging the fight into the mud. They are refusing to come up to 30,000 feet where the jets rule. They are hugging the terrain. They are flying 10 feet above the Yalu River, weaving between heavy anti-aircraft fire and mountain peaks. This is a domain where the jet engine is a liability. Jet engines gulp fuel at low altitudes. The air is thick. The turbine efficiency drops. The MiG-15 pilot has minutes of fuel to fight down low. The P-51 Mustang, with its efficient piston engine, can loiter there for hours. The Americans are playing a game of patience. They are waiting for the Soviet pilots to run low on fuel. They are waiting for them to make a mistake. The mystery deepens when the Soviet advisors examine the tactics used by the Mustang pilots. These are not the tactics of the current US Air Force training manuals. The current manuals emphasize formation flying, radar intercepts, and distance. But the pilots flying these Mustangs are doing something ancient. They are flying the thack weave. They are using scissors maneuvers. These are dogfighting techniques from a different era. They are flying with a level of intuition that suggests they aren't just reading instruments, they are feeling the air. There is a specific report from April 1951. A flight of MiG-15 aircraft engages a group of Mustangs near the Sinuiju airfield. It should be a slaughter. The MiGs have the numbers. They have the altitude. But the Mustangs form a defensive circle. They create a Loughbury circle, a tactic dating back to World War I. Each plane protects the tail of the plane in front of it. It is a wheel of death. If a MiG tries to attack one Mustang, he exposes himself to the guns of the Mustang behind it. The Soviet pilots orbit above, furious. They cannot break the circle. They dive, they fire, and they pull up, achieving nothing. The Mustangs just keep turning, round and round, churning the air, daring the jets to enter their meat grinder. It is a psychological humiliation. The most advanced technology on Earth is being held at bay by a tactic invented when planes were made of wood and canvas. The Soviet command begins to suspect that the hardware is not the problem. They start looking at the software, the pilots. They begin to analyze the radio intercepts more closely. They listen to the voices of the Americans. They don't sound panicked. They don't sound like young conscripts terrified of the speed of sound. They sound bored. They sound cynical. They make jokes in the middle of a firefight. One intercept records a Mustang pilot singing a country song while dodging 37mm cannon fire. Another records a pilot calmly calling out the arrival of MiGs as if he were spotting traffic. Bandits at 12 o'clock high. Let's make 'em pay. This nonchalance is baffling to the communist bloc. To them, war is a scientific struggle of systems. To these Americans, it seems to be a sport. The investigation turns to the specific units involved. Who are these people? The Soviet intelligence knows the US Air Force is transitioning to jets. The F-86 Sabre aircraft is the new darling. The best pilots are supposed to be in the Sabres. The P-51 Mustang units are supposed to be the leftovers, the ground pounders, the National Guard units sent to fill the gaps. So why are the leftovers fighting like demons? A theory emerges in the Kremlin. Perhaps the Americans have developed a new gun sight. Perhaps they have a new radar warning receiver that tells them when a jet is diving. KGB agents in the West are tasked with finding out. They steal manuals. They bribe mechanics. But every lead comes back to the same impossible conclusion. There is no new tech. The P-51 Mustang is exactly the same plane that flew over Berlin in 1945. It hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed is the enemy it is fighting. And perhaps that is the key. The Soviet pilots are trained to fight machines. They are trained to intercept bombers. They are not trained to fight ghosts from the past. The tension in the air bases across the border reaches a breaking point. The Soviet pilots start to fear the propeller planes more than the jets. You can see a Sabre. You can understand a Sabre. It fights like you. But the Mustang is small, hard to see, and fights dirty. It hides in the Sunday, it hides in the trees. It is a guerrilla fighter in the sky. And then, the Americans do something that shifts the mystery from how are they surviving to what are they planning. They start using the Mustangs as bait. They send lone P-51 aircraft deep into enemy territory, flying slow and high, a suicide profile. The Soviet radar operators see the easy kill. They scramble the MiGs. The jets launch, burning precious fuel to climb and catch the slow intruder. But just as the MiGs commit to the attack, just as they bleed their energy trying to turn with the Mustang, the trap springs. Summer 1951. The trap springs. The Soviet radar operators watch in horror as the lone P-51 Mustang aircraft they were tracking suddenly gets company. From the stratosphere, 20,000 feet above the engagement, silver streaks descend like falling stars. These are the F-86 Sabre aircraft. The MiG-15 pilots have been duped. By slowing down to engage the propeller planes, they have shed their energy. They have become slow, heavy targets. They are no longer fighting the past. They are being crushed by the future. The Sabres scream down, their 50 caliber guns ripping into the stalled Soviet formations. But the twist in this narrative isn't just the arrival of the Sabres. That was expected. The true shock comes from what the P-51 Mustangs do during this chaos. Logic dictates that when the big boys arrive, the jets versus jets dogfight, the propeller planes should run for cover. They should dive to the deck and flee south. They are soft targets in a supersonic crossfire. But they don't run. The Soviet pilots, now scrambling to escape the Sabres, attempt to dive away toward the safety of the Manchurian border. They push their noses down, seeking the sanctuary of the ground clutter. They think they have escaped the high-altitude Sabres. But waiting for them in the weeds, prowling at treetop level, are the Mustangs. This is the high-low mix, a tactic that the Soviet advisors had not anticipated. The Americans have turned the airspace into a two-tiered kill box. If you go high, the Sabres get you. If you go low to escape the Sabres, the Mustangs are waiting to cut you off. The psychological impact on the Soviet air regiments is devastating. They are trapped in a vertical vice. A report reaches the Kremlin describing an incident where a MiG-15 pilot, fleeing a Sabre, dives into a valley only to find a P-51 Mustang aircraft flying towards him, playing a game of chicken. The closing speed is over 1,000 miles per hour. The jet pilot flinches. He brakes hard to the right to avoid the collision. In doing so, he bleeds off his remaining speed and exposes his broadside. The Mustang pilot, who never flinched, banks around and pours fire into the jet's cockpit. It is brutal. Close-quarters knife fighting. The mystery of who is flying these planes begins to unravel through the radio intercepts. The Soviet linguists are working overtime. They are expecting to hear the frantic voices of young men. Instead, they hear the calm, raspy voices of men who sound like they are at the office. They hear call signs that don't match the standard US Air Force numeric designations. They hear nicknames. They hear references to places like Berlin and Tokyo. The realization hits the intelligence officers like a physical blow. They cross-reference the pilot rosters. They look at the ages of the men being shot down or captured. These are not 19-year-old conscripts. These are 30-year-old men. These are reservists and National Guardsmen. Why is this a shock? Because in the Soviet doctrine, the reserves are the second stringers. They are the ones who aren't good enough for the front line. But in the American system, the reserves in 1950 are the veterans of World War II. The pilot flying that obsolete P-50, one Mustang probably has 2,000 hours of combat time. He survived the Luftwaffe. He survived the Japanese Zero fighters. He has flown more combat missions than the entire Soviet squadron combined. The Soviet advisors realize they have made a fatal calculation. They pitted their best machines against the Americans' best experience. And experience is winning. The twist deepens when the Soviets realize why these veterans prefer the Mustang. It isn't just because it's what they know, it's because of the loiter time. A jet fighter can stay over the battlefield for maybe 30 minutes before it hits bingo fuel and has to go home. A P-50, one Mustang can stay there for hours. It can orbit, it can watch, This reveals the true, terrifying role of the Mustang in this war. It isn't just a fighter, it is the eye of God. The P-51 seconds are acting as forward air controllers. They are spotting Soviet supply trucks, camouflaged tanks, and hidden artillery positions that the fast-moving jets miss completely. They are circling like vultures, calling in airstrikes from the heavy bombers, or diving down to strafe targets with rockets and napalm. The MiG-15 pilots are ordered to stop these mosquitoes. They are told to prioritize the Mustangs because the Mustangs are the ones hurting the ground war. But every time the MiGs try to intervene, the velocity trap resets. The Mustangs turn tight. The MiGs overshoot. The Sabres pounce. It becomes a cycle of frustration. The Soviet Union is pouring money and technology into the air war, building newer, faster MiGs, sending more pilots, but they cannot dislodge these stubborn, propeller-driven pests. Then, in late 1951, a specific piece of wreckage is recovered. It is the tail section of a P-51 Mustang. The markings on it are distinct. It doesn't belong to a standard Air Force wing. The intelligence officers trace the unit. The findings are confusing. The unit history goes back years. These pilots are not just Air Force. Some of them are flying from carriers, some are Marines. The inter-service coordination of the Americans is something the rigid Soviet command structure struggles to comprehend. In the Soviet military, the Army and Air Force barely speak. In Korea, an Air Force Mustang is covering a Marine Corsair, which is covering an Army tank. The synergy is the weapon, but the biggest shock is yet to come. The Soviet analysis of the air battles reveals a disturbing trend. The kill ratios are skewing wildly in favor of the Americans. For every Sabre lost, they are shooting down multiple MiGs. And even the P-51 seconds, the sitting ducks, are maintaining a 1-to-1 kill ratio against the jets in defensive maneuvers. How is this possible? The MiG-15 aircraft is superior in climb, speed and ceiling. It has bigger guns. The answer lies in a small, black box inside the cockpit of the American planes, a piece of technology that the Soviets have heard rumors of, but never seen. A technology that bridges the gap between the human eye and the impossible speed of jet warfare. The Soviets suspect the Americans have automated the act of killing. The year is 1952. The Soviet investigation into the Mustang anomaly has reached its conclusion, and the findings are sitting on a heavy oak desk in Moscow. The report does not contain excuses. It contains a terrifying realization about the nature of American warfare. The secret to the P-51 Mustang's impossible victories against the MiG-15 aircraft was not a new engine, it was not a secret rocket. It was a combination of mathematics and biology that the Soviet Union had severely underestimated. The black box that the intelligence officers feared was the K-14 gyro gun sight. To understand why this device was the ultimate shock, you have to understand the difficulty of aerial gunnery. Shooting down a plane in 1950 is not like the movies. You do not aim at the enemy. If you aim at a jet traveling at 600 miles per hour, your bullets will pass harmlessly behind it. You have to shoot where the plane is going to be. You have to calculate deflection. For a human brain, this calculation is a nightmare. You have to estimate the enemy's speed, his range, your speed, the angle of his turn, and the drop of your bullets due to gravity. You have to do this in a fraction of a second, while your heart is pounding at 180 beats per minute. The Soviet sights in the MiG-15 aircraft were simple. They were essentially fixed optical reticles. The pilot had to guess the lead. He had to rely on Kentucky windage. At jet speeds, a guess that is off by a fraction of a degree results in a miss of hundreds of feet. But the Americans had automated this process. The K-14 sight in the cockpit of the P-51 Mustang was an analog computer. It used gyroscopes and magnetic fields to sense the rate of turn. The American pilot simply dialed in the wingspan of the target 33 feet for a MiG-15 aircraft. Then he maneuvered his plane until the diamond on the glass screen enclosed the enemy jet. The moment the diamond circled the MiG, the computer had solved the equation. The gyros moved the reticle to the exact point in empty space where the pilot needed to fire. While the Soviet pilot was spraying bullets and praying for a hit, the American veteran in the obsolete propeller plane was firing with mathematical certainty. The Mustang pilot didn't need to be faster, he just needed a 2-second window. The moment the MiG crossed his path, the K-14 told him exactly when to pull the trigger. The result was a stream of 50-caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds, slamming into the MiG's fuel tanks with surgical precision. This was the technological shock. The Americans had taken an old airframe and fitted it with a brain that was smarter than the pilot. But the report details a second biological advantage, the G-suit. During the intense dogfights in the valleys, Soviet pilots reported graying out. When a plane turns hard, centrifugal force drains the blood from the pilot's brain and pools it in his legs. Vision narrows. Consciousness fades. A human being can withstand about 4 or 5 Gs before fainting. The MiG-15 aircraft was capable of pulling 8 Gs. The pilot was the weak link. The machine could turn, but the man would die. The Americans, however, were wearing the G3 Ampere's anti-G suit. It looked like a strange pair of inflatable trousers cut away at the knees and crotch. It was connected by a hose to the plane's air system. When the Mustang pulled high Gs, a valve opened, and bladders inside the suit instantly inflated, squeezing the pilot's calves, thighs, and abdomen. This pressure physically forced the blood back up into the head. It allowed the American pilots to pull 6 or 7 Gs and stay awake. They could turn tighter, harder, and longer than their Soviet counterparts. To the Soviet pilot struggling to stay conscious in a tight turn, the American pilot seemed superhuman. He wasn't blacking out, he wasn't losing control, he was sticking to the MiG's tail like a magnet. The culmination of this mystery, the reveal of the total strategic failure, happened not in the air, but in the frantic changes to Soviet doctrine. By late 1952, the humiliation was complete. The North Korean and Soviet high command were forced to do the unthinkable. They had to admit that the jet age had failed to dislodge the propeller age. They began to deploy their own propeller planes at night. The Polikarpov Po-2, a fabric-covered biplane that looked like a farm crop duster, was sent out to harass the Americans. It was an admission of defeat. They realized that speed was not the only metric of victory. But the most cinematic moment of this saga, the moment that encapsulates the entire struggle, occurred when the US Marines and Air Force began using the obsolete planes to trap the modern ones intentionally. There is a recorded engagement where a flight of P-51 Mustangs was jumped by MiGs. The Mustangs didn't scatter, they broke into pairs. The lead Mustang would fly erratic, jerky movements, the drunken sailor flight path, making it impossible for the MiG's simple sights to track. As the MiG pilot tried to correct his aim, wrestling with the heavy controls of the jet, the wingman Mustang would slide into the blind spot beneath the jet's tail. The MiG pilot, focused on the chaotic movement of the target in front, would never see the death coming from below. The prop plane, using its superior low-speed lift, would hanging on its propeller and fire a burst into the soft underbelly of the jet. The jet would explode. The wreckage of these multi-million ruble jets scattered across the rice paddies of Korea became a testament to a hard lesson for the Soviet Union. Technology without doctrine is useless. A fast sword is useless if the swordsman is blind. As the war wound down in 1953, the P-51 Mustang was finally retired. It was replaced by the F-86 Sabre and the Century Series fighters. But the damage to the Soviet ego was permanent. The pilots of the USSR had been promised that the revolution provided superior machinery. They were told that the capitalist equipment was old, rotting, and weak. But they had been shot down by planes that were designed when Stalin was still allies with Roosevelt. The psychological impact rippled through the Cold War. It forced the Soviet Union to redesign their entire pilot training program. They realized they couldn't just teach men to fly, they had to teach them to fight. They had to copy the American G-suits. They had to steal the designs for the computing gun sights. The mystery of the impossible victories wasn't magic. It was the result of a system that valued the pilot over the plane. The Americans put a computer in the cockpit to help the man aim. They put a pneumatic suit on his legs to keep him awake. They valued the software, the human element, more than the hardware. The Soviet Union had built a Ferrari, but they had put a novice driver in the seat and told him to race on a dirt track. The Americans brought a rally car driven by a professional. In the end, the image that remains is not the sleek silver shape of the jet breaking the sound barrier. It is the silhouette of the P-51 Mustang, its four-bladed propeller chopping the air, banking hard over the Yalu River, proving that in the art of war, the newest weapon is not always the deadliest. The Mustang pilots, the old men of the war, walked away with a secret smile. They knew they had done the impossible. They had taken a relic of the past and used it to shoot down the future. This concludes our investigation into the battle of the old against the new. The Cold War was fought on many fronts, nuclear, economic, and cultural, but sometimes it was fought with nothing more than a steady hand, a spinning propeller, and the nerve to fly head-on into the jet age.